interaction. It could be someone in a business meeting, and I get excited. I get a little giddy because there's another left-handed person. And then I always got to throw out the facts about, all the brilliant people that are left-handed and how we're part of this group. Now, that's all well and good. Here's where my ethics could come into play. What if I only hired or promoted people that were left-handed? What if I only dated people that were left-handed? What if I only donated to organizations um, that somehow did something that would benefit left-handed people? What if I only gave the special assignments to my employees that were left-handed? You see how that bias can come in, and um, so it's something. It seems so silly as that, right? But we do it all the time. We do it with gender. We do it with race. We do it with, well, I went to, college XYZ. So, like, for instance, you could say I went to Purdue University Global, and um, now at that point, when I see another resume that comes across my desk and it has, PUG, I can say, hey, that person gets the job. Um, that happens so often. So we have to be mindful of that. We have to also be mindful that managers hire people who are like them, that we think that we're immune to conflicts of interest, when in actuality, managers have higher probability of having a conflict of interest. Because the more you go up the ladder, the more relationships you have internally and externally. And so you have a higher probability of having a conflict of interest. Something else that managers don't realize is they take more credit than they deserve, which is a pet peeve of mine. I truly think that if you're a manager over a team and your team does the work, they do a great job, then you need to make sure that the team gets credit for it. You don't get credit for overseeing and making sure they did their job and they did it on time. Something else that managers do, excuse me, I am fighting a cold, so give me a moment every now and then to catch my breath. This is the most that I've spoken in days. So the other thing that managers do is blame others when they deserve some of the blame. Um, Here's an example. We have the Titanic. The Titanic goes down. It's going down. The captain isn't going around the ship pointing fingers and blaming everyone for what they didn't do or how they didn't do something. The captain takes ownership and says, this is my ship. I go down with my ship. And he went down with the ship. He didn't jump in the first life raft or boat and scoot away. He stayed with the ship. Excuse me. That's a sign of a great manager, a sign of a great leader. And so we need to make sure that managers are well aware that if any ways that your team fails, you're part of that failure. If there was oversight, then why didn't you catch it before it went to the client or before it went to your supervisor or your boss? Before it was executed, you're supposed to double check. So making sure that you take some of the blame as well. Now, when we look at moral philosophy and ethical systems, I'm just going to go through these. Virtual ethics is the perspective where we believe, I'm trying to make sure I do this right, what is moral is going to come from a person who's mature and they have good moral character. And because of that, they're deemed right. So it's your virtue that you're good, you're moral, you're mature. And that's where we get that philosophy. Universalism is upheld by certain values that we as a society believe that we need to function. It's just a universal belief system. And when people violate that, we find ways to punish them for that. When we look at egoism, it's simple. It's self-interest. It's me, myself, and I. Right? It's it. That's what guides it. How to protect me. How to promote me. How to uplift me. If you come up, fine, but I'm not trying to help you. And when we look at relativism, It's based on our opinions and behaviors of other people in relation to us, and that's how we then make our decisions on how to behave. So we're relating to others, and if other people are doing it, then we're going to do it too. So that can go both ways. And utilitarianism states that the greatest good for the greatest number of people is what we should focus on. So we're not going to focus on the least of, we're going to focus on the greatest number of people. So if we have, mass poverty, then that's what the focus is on. If we have a large number of people in the warehouse that are being taken advantage of, then that should be the overriding concern of the decision makers. If we have a lot of people on frontline that have faulty equipment, then we need to make sure that we tend to their needs first. Kohlberg, that you're going to read about in your textbook, shares the stages of moral development. And with that is the first comes as your self-interest, right? Your pre-conventional stage is that self-interest. So here's an example that's shared. You're at work and there's a flash drive and you need it. So you take it. You don't want to have to go to the store to buy one. So you take it. It's there. It's obviously free. So you take it. If it wasn't for you, the workplace wouldn't provide it. So you take it. That's the pre-conventional stage. In the conventional stage, you start to conform to the group, whether that's your family, your work, your coworkers, or society. So now we have the flash drive. You have the flash drive at work. You're looking at it. You're contemplating it. You're thinking, it's free. They gave it to me. I could take it. It's mine. But you change your mind because you know that if someone saw you taking the flash drive, they would frown upon it. They'd look down upon you. They would say it didn't look right. Because the perception is that it's not right, so I'm not going to do it. Even though I can try to justify it. That's the conventional stage. When you get to the principled stage, you have your own ethical principles that you stand on, your own convictions. And so when you see the flash drive, you don't even consider, because you know it's wrong. You know that you didn't buy it. You know that the company bought it. They're providing it for you to use at work. That's it. You don't even think twice. It's not yours. You just go to the Staples, Office Depot, Office Max, Walmart, wherever. You go wherever you got to go, Walgreens, and you get your own flash drive. That's the principled stage. When we look at ethics as it ties to the law, some of you probably cringed when you just saw this slide, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. It's a stricter accounting and reporting system that's used because, we had all these Enron and everything else going on with these folks having these double sets of books and misleading investors and misleading the SEC and everything else. So this act was put in place to make those senior managers, those CEOs, CFOs, COOs more accountable. It also was to help improve and maintain investor confidence, because if investors lack the confidence in your accounting practices, they're going to start pulling out of that. Not only that, your company, but they'll start feeling that way about other companies, and markets can crash. If markets crash, economies crash. If economies crash, countries crash. Countries crashes, you can have, oh my goodness. Yeah. Right? That's when you start seeing all this Armageddon stuff that these movies and everyone else that already has their underground tunnels will be fine, but the rest of us will fall prey. So the Sarbanes-Oxley Act helps to establish and reinforce those things. It assigns that responsibility to that C-suite. It excludes anyone who violates the standards from holding management positions. So if you're caught, you can't be in a management position, period. Now, here's the funny thing is that people that violate find a way to get around it. All they do is end up getting some other, position, and they just don't. And then what happens is that they just don't assign anyone to um, be under them. But you still, it's not like all of a sudden you're now working in the warehouse. No, they just give you a cushy position. Let's just be blunt about it. Um, there's always people always work around it, but this is what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to violate that right, and it's actually not a right; it's a privilege. Excuse me, that privilege within a company. So if you are the CEO, you could then be given some other title or consultant, right? They'll do that, so that you're still getting paid to do work, but now you just don't have anyone that you're managing. There's under reports to you. Something else that it does, it provides training and ethics to all employees, and to monitor compliance. And there's incentives for complying, and there's also consequences for violating. Um, so when we look at how ethics and an ethical climate impacts us as employees, we're looking at how we um, make decisions, how they're evaluated, and we're looking at the difference between right and wrong. And some of the things that have been red flags over the last umpteenth years and longer have been, for instance, how much we pay CEOs. And I don't know if I shared with you guys an article. There had been had been this really detailed article that stated that there's some of the top CEOs in the country are actually the ones that are the least performing. Like they have the lowest performance. So, but they're getting paid as though they're high performers, as though they're rolling up their sleeves. Another ethical dilemma is commercialization in schools, religion as work, sweatshops, and wages. And so you could see where people are then having to evaluate what's right and what's wrong. Because what we get away with is, well, it's not illegal. It may not be illegal, but is it wrong? And that's what you come back to. Some danger signs: excessive emphasis on short-term revenues over longer-term considerations. So when you're trying to hurry up and get that fast buck, you have a higher probability of doing something unethical, right? Fudging the numbers or just blatantly lying. A failure to establish a written code of ethics, desire for simple, quick fix solutions to ethical problems. There aren't any quick fix solutions to ethical problems. You have to untangle that and relay that foundation properly. The fourth danger sign is an unwillingness to take an ethical stand that may impose financial cost, right? Because you're like, I don't, how is it gonna cost? No, if it's gonna cost, it's gonna either cost you now or it's gonna cost you later, and it'll probably cost you way more later, especially if a judge finds out that you knew. Then the judge is gonna punish you by making you pay more. A fifth danger sign is consideration of ethics solely as a legal issue or a public relations tool. When you're trying to have this look of being an ethical organization, no different than when we talk about corporate social responsibility, we'll talk about shortly, how some people use it as a PR tool. You just want to look good, but you're actually not, it's not part of you, it's not part of the fabric of your organization, it's not part of the culture. Danger sign 6 is lack of clear procedures for handling ethical problems. And then the seventh danger sign is responsiveness to the demands of shareholders at the expense of other constituencies. So if you are only concerned about the shareholders because you don't want to lose the value of your stock, and you're not concerned about your workers and the customers and the vendors, that's a danger sign. When we look at corporate ethics programs, we have some that are compliance-based and integrity-based. When we look at the compliance-based programs, They're designed usually by corporate counsel, and you have them put into place to prevent, detect, and punish legal violations. Corporate counsel is usually like your legal team that helps do that. Your integrity based program is where you're having people take personal responsibility for their behavior. So you're making them own up, be big boys and big girls in the workplace. And that's that type of program. When we look at how we go about making decisions, you have to have moral awareness. You have to realize that there's some ethical implications to the issue at hand. You have to know what actions are morally defensible. That's where your moral judgment comes in. And your character, as I mentioned earlier, your strength and persistence to act despite, what's popular or what's common or well, we do it this way all the time. Well, that doesn't matter if it's unethical. And so you have, where's your character stand and all that? Let's see. Now, let's look at the process for making an ethical decision. We look at the moral standards, and of course, you have to understand them. You have to recognize the impact that if it's going to benefit some, harm others, whose rights are exercised or denied, and then that is funneled into defining the moral problem, and you have to define it completely, wholly, um, and with transparency, and then determine how it's going to impact your organization financially. What are some legal requirements that you have to comply with? What are the ethical duties that you need to evaluate? Because you need to make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to do. And then from that, you create a proposal of what the solution should be so that you're on the morally right side of the issue and not on the wrong side. If you have any questions about what I've shared, please feel free to email me, natasha.foreman@purdueglobal.edu. Now, when we look at CSR, it's our obligation to, excuse me, to society, economically, legally, ethically, and philanthropically. And some companies this is really embedded within them and the culture, and other companies, it's just a fluff. It's just a PR tool to make them look good. If it's fluff, if whether or not you see employees taking part in it or not. If it's something that, once a year or, once every few years they mention something that they're doing, or if the giving back is so minimal in value or impact, then okay, this is just, for the most part, this is just PR. Now, and let me back up really quick because I want to clarify something. That's not, and this is when I mean that, I'm talking about in large organizations. In smaller organizations, if you decide to adopt a classroom at an elementary school, that is something that you choose to do, and you're doing that for a whole year. That's huge. What I'm saying is that if you try to say as a small organization, if you gave away one burger to a person for the whole year, come on, that's that's just absurd. So, understanding based on context of what I mean by in the way in which you give and how you give and the impact that it has. Um, that is what we really look at. And that's what you should look at when you're considering partnering with an organization or becoming, an employee of, or you're investing in. Look closely at what they're doing to give back to society, because society is keeping them in business. So what are they doing to say thank you? Society is allowing them to encroach in their areas by, building more, you know, infrastructure and in space and pouring stuff into dumping stuff into land and water and everything else. So if you're going to impact us, our health and our well-being, and you're crowding up our space, then how are you going to pay us back? How are you going to, make us feel great about this? So that's one way. Now, when we look at this on using a pyramid, because for some reason we like using the pyramids, it always makes people think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So some of you probably thought that, but when we look at the bulk of it, your philanthropic responsibility is being a good global corporate citizen, and what do your global stakeholders desire from you? Those global stakeholders are all of the people that buy, sell, use your products and services. The ethical responsibility is doing what is expected by your global stakeholders. And your legal responsibility is doing what's required by global stakeholders, including obeying the law, right? And your economic responsibility is being profitable while also making sure that you're doing what's required by global capitalism. So understanding that the economic systems that we, for the most part, the markets rely upon is capitalism. And so how are you aligning with that so that you don't disrupt the markets? Do you have to really, do you have to be socially responsible? Responsible? No, you don't. You don't have to be. But do you have a social responsibility? Yes, you do. You don't have to be socially responsible, but you really do have a social responsibility. Does that make sense? So when we look at the shareholder model, this says that you're supposed to be responsible to the shareholders and making sure that you can maximize profits, because I invested in this company and I want to make sure that I make a whole lot of money. The stakeholder model says that you are obligated to look beyond just making that profit, but seeing all the ways that you can make that organization thrive and how you can make sure that everyone that interacts, not just your shareholders, but every single stakeholder, from your employees and customers to the vendors that you work with, how everyone is impacted by the decisions that you make. So as the saying goes, you can do good and do well. So there's a way to maximize your profit and be socially responsible. And there's been recent attention that's been centered on the possible competitive advantage of having CSR actions enacted, and not just during certain seasons, but year-round, where it becomes embedded in the culture of your organization. Once again, if you guys have any questions, please email them to me at natasha.foreman@purdueglobal.edu. So let me go over the Unit 7 deliverables. This week you guys have your discussion question 7. Bear with me for a second. Did I already close it out? Hold on, you guys. I put the information in. I don't know why it's not doing it. I put the information in the when I shared the announcement for yesterday. But let me go ahead and do this again because it's not cooperating. Let's see. Here we go. I closed out the window by accident. So, Unit 7. You're reading chapter 4. You have a quiz for chapter 7. Your discussion, you're going to be talking about the steps for the process of making ethical decisions. You're going to use the steps described in chapter 4 and describe an ethical dilemma that you faced in the last year, and then apply those steps to the process. So when you look at that dilemma and you describe it, and you go through the process of the steps that you take, does that solution that you eventually arrive to, when you applied the process, does it match with what you actually did, like what actually happened? And it could be something you did or someone else that does it. Either way, did it happen? Or if not, why? If it did, great. Explain that. Then explain how you might use this process in your own personal or professional life. Your assignment, you're going to consider the role of CSR in an organization's strategy, and you're going to use the material from chapter 4 as well as any independent research that you do, and you're going to draft an informative essay that will make the connection between a theoretical understanding of CSR and how it's reflected in the strategies of a real organization. So you're going to use your research skills, folks. Locate and define the CSR policy of a well-known public company. It could be one that you've already used. Refer to their initiatives and identify which pillars of responsibility they seem most focused on. So they may focus on philanthropic, ethical, legal, or economic. Give at least 2 specific examples, because they don't have to. They don't have to, cover all of those. They can just cover one. They could just be a philanthropic initiative that they focus on, and then give 2 examples. And then in research their mission statement, describe how it aligns with their CSR policy and give 2 examples. Make sure that you're using 2 external sources as your research. So it could be your textbook plus one other source. This needs to be 2 pages. That does not include your title page, and it does not include your reference page. So when you include those 2, that should be a minimum of 4 pages. So I need to see a title page, an introduction, main body, conclusion, and a reference list. A minimum of 4 pages, 12-point font, double spaced. There is a rubric, so make sure you use it. And that's that. I'll have Unit 6 deliverables graded between now and Sunday. So with that, I hope that you guys have a great night, and I hope to get Bongo working for our Unit 9 seminar in 2 weeks, but I'll be recording Unit 8 shortly. Have a great night, everyone.